So here's the thing about Shira Schwooper from Long Story Short. She is a classic example of a middle child. This show does a wonderful job of writing family dynamics between siblings, between them and their parents, and how these intricate relationships play out in everyday scenarios throughout the house, or even later in life when the family no longer lives together. You see, throughout her life, Shira has struggled with feeling invisible, forgotten, or being an afterthought. Right in the very first scene, while Yoshi is annoying the shit out of her, she isn't even able to get anyone to come to her aid or really pay attention to her, simply being told to suffer in silence. And after the airport, there's a bit of frustration that her parents wouldn't make an entirely separate trip for her, and she was forced to wait for Avi, as if she isn't special enough to warrant her own trip. There's also a few years later when Avi and her were at the beach playing lifeguard with one another, and Avi ends up being distracted by his cousins and assuming that she is alright in the ocean, that she can save herself, while meanwhile she gets hit by a wave, then taken by the undercurrent and genuinely fears for her life. She thinks that she is going to drown here. Like, I appreciate how they represented how damaging this was for her, and how even though Avi could never have even known it was happening, Shira carried this with her for a long time, never really forgetting how it felt to almost be swept away and not have anyone in her family even pay attention, and then being chastised for being irresponsible even though she did nothing wrong and was merely a victim. I do believe that through all these scenarios from her childhood, they show us that Shira suffers from middle child syndrome, and that this is a part of the cause for her very boisterous personality, which is not a fault, by the way. I love Shira's attitude, and as always, this is merely an observation of a phenomenon, not something that dooms every middle child. However, there are observed psychological factors that can develop due to one's position in the birth order, and it is common for middle children to feel overlooked or less special than their other siblings. There have even been studies that show how middle children are less likely to approach their parents and confide their problems in them, as well as less likely to describe their parents as supportive people. Though, I doubt anyone would describe Naomi as supportive. But there is a significant phenomenon of middle children perceiving less love coming from their parents due to when they were born. And as always, I have linked my sources in the description below. I am not just talking out of my ass here. But overall, there's a definite effect that Shira's position in the family has on her personality as a whole. Even in the opening sequence, a lot of the photos of younger Shira show her rather apathetic, not smiling, and instead protesting against the photo by keeping a straight face, almost in rebellion. Or there's another photo of Avi just sitting on her without a care in the world, and she is complaining and crying, but her parents are not even remotely paying attention to her, instead dealing with Yoshi. And another where Yoshi is bullying and harassing her.
Yoshi, your sister is not a puppet.
I mean, God, this show is so good with the little tidbits that give you clearer pictures about all of these characters. I mean, even in the intro sequence. Like, even with the little content we have so far, it is clear to me that Shira throughout her childhood was often sidelined, as many middle children can be. So through all of this, Shira becomes a tad rough on the outside. She has her preferences and she doesn't want to compromise them, as she's been doing her whole life with her brothers since her parents never actually paid attention to what she was going through. She doesn't really open up about her feelings, cry, or confide in others because generally she assumes that nobody will listen anyway, and this perception only grows over time, because once she's able to finally open up to Baby Feldstein about her feelings, she is shot down hard. And I believe this plays into a large part of her personality moving into adulthood. We really get a ton of indication that she was in love with Baby, that was the first serious relationship Shira ever formed, even having been friends with her since they were tiny children for years prior, and placed a high value on this relationship overall. However, Baby does not feel the same way, and was essentially using Shira for sex and intimacy, but was not really willing to commit to her in any actual way. I mean, even when Shira approached the conversation in a very nonchalant, easygoing way when they're chilling in her bedroom, Baby just kind of pushes her away and refuses to really talk about anything that is going on with the two of them. But again, this relationship is super important to Shira's identity, and she needs to hear what Baby truly feels about her. So she ends up going to prom to confront her anyway, seeing Baby with someone else. And it's here that Baby tells Shira that they're not actually in a relationship, and that she doesn't actually care that much for her or her feelings, and that this whole thing that they have meant pretty much nothing to her. This irreparably hurts Shira's sense of trust, as the one relationship that she thought really saw her for who she is after her whole life feeling invisible in her own family was stated to be meaningless. It really took a lot of effort from Shira's behalf to open herself up to Baby, to even allow herself to fall for her and ultimately admit these feelings. For her to be struck down so heavily by this person she really trusted, again, friends since they were children, it absolutely crushes her ability to truly have faith in other people, especially those that are most close to her. I think this is also why Shira seems to keep score with those around her. You know, she remembers those small mistakes from years ago and keeps them with her for so long, never forgets the faults to make sure that she isn't hurt again, or at least isn't surprised when someone hurts her. I mean, we get a lot of context about how Shira never really forgot about this relationship and carried this pain along with her for years. She scratches out Baby's eyes in photos, disses her to her parents, and blows up when Yoshi mentions that he spent the night with her. However, we also see with the earrings in the first episode that she actually wants to make up with Baby at first.
You know what's really dumb? Baby actually got me these earrings, and I wore them tonight as like a peace offering, you know? But now she's not even here, and I'm wearing these things like an idiot, and everyone can see.
Why do you even care? You haven't talked to Baby in over a year.
She doesn't enjoy hating her. It's not like Shira is some negative person who loves getting angry at others, as Baby often presents her. She doesn't want to resent her for what she put her through and would prefer to patch things up and maybe even be with her again, as this is before she meets Kendra. But by not even showing up to Yoshi's bar mitzvah and making that peace offering as Shira saw it, Baby sends her down the same emotional path that she has already tread on, cementing her hate for decades and decades. And so later in life, she really has trouble admitting her feelings, putting trust in others, or asking for any sort of help, letting anyone past those thick walls of hers. This isn't to say that she's averse to intimacy as a whole, as she is clearly able to keep a healthy relationship with Kendra, but there is an abundant amount of evidence, even with the small amount of content that we get this season, that she really struggles with opening herself up. Like I said earlier, none of this defines you as a person. It's not like if you are a middle child, this will definitely happen to you, or you will grow up to be exactly the same. You'll always feel this way. That is not true. I am just recognizing a definite pattern in this character's upbringing and subsequent development into an adult and connecting it to some things that do happen in reality. Does it mean that you are doomed if you're a middle child? Are you kidding me? No, not at all. I'm sure there are thousands of middle children out there who could speak to the love their parents have given them. But specifically, I'd like to cite the Kanish incident as a major indicator of this type of behavior inside of Shira. I think there's definitely multiple ways to interpret her behavior this episode and her fervor to make these Kanishes correctly, but I saw it, at least a little bit, as a misdirection for her grief about her mother's semi-recent passing. Her insistence on making them just like Naomi did with the extra garlic is her way to feel connected to her mother, despite the fact that she's unable to actually be with her any longer. Hence her complaining about not being able to call her and how frustrating it is this whole episode. It is also, as Elliot says, a way for her to demonstrate her love to her family, but I do believe that this is sort of a way for Shira to cope without necessarily talking about her feelings. And I think it also shows how Shira is often rebellious, taking the more difficult path on purpose. She kind of resents things being easy or taking a shortcut and insists that she has to do the more difficult option possible, and then of course is miserable the entire time walking down it. But if she didn't, that would insinuate that she doesn't love them as much. Something I believe again reminds her of her mother and helps her feel closer to her in this time where she can't speak to her. And while this certainly isn't toxic behavior, it does have an effect on Kendra, who is forced to take care of the entire house and her job, as Shira throws herself entirely into making these incredibly difficult Kanishes, despite it not being really necessary. It would be better if Shira was able to simply have a conversation with Kendra about how she was feeling to kind of reach that catharsis, but that is an incredibly, logical move that wouldn't really come to Shira's mind as she's in the throes of of making these knishes. It's not really her personality, her way of doing things. Additionally, with the whole baby fiasco, when she's asking her brothers to provide sperm so that she and Kendra could conceive, we get a lot of context about Shira's ability to ask for help or ask things from her family. When she first is attempting to ask Avi, she really struggles to even bring up the topic, deflecting early on and then even phrasing it in an extremely odd manner at a very inopportune time, like during a kid's Christmas pageant. And when the conversation begins about whether or not he wants to or why Shira wants to in the first place, she becomes rather defensive and rescinds the offer, stating that she knew that he wouldn't do anything for her because nobody in her family ever does anything for her. And even though they definitely move past this argument later in the episode, Shira still can't bring herself to ask Avi anymore, stating that she made it weird. She really has trouble asking for help from her siblings and believing that they will help her. Even later, after finding out about Yoshi finishing early with Baby and ending up not being able to provide it after he promised her, she really recedes into this damaging and negative perception of her family as being against her, or at the very least, uncaring about her in the slightest. This is a terribly tragic moment that I do think affected the siblings' dynamic going forward in a major way. During the fake intervention, Shira mentions offhandedly that she really hasn't kept up with Yoshi since he moved to LA, and we know that Avi doesn't visit his family very often. It's not as if they're on poor terms. Let me be clear with that, which is why I think the show is super realistic. It's not uber dramatic, but it's very grounded conflicts. But this argument is never exactly resolved, at least from what we have seen of them thus far. So this open wound is continually festering in the years after this, perhaps subtly dividing Shira away from the siblings, especially now that she has her own full life and family. She doesn't really trust the two of them anymore, and gives them every indication that she intends not to rely on them emotionally any further, or really open herself up to their help either. It seems like that drive that she had when she initially asked Avi to provide his sperm, to get him to visit and spend time with her more often, is kind of fading away after this really harsh division. It hurts me to think about, honestly, and I hope that we are able to address this in season 2. Again, it is pretty realistic not to over address it, and I would add that there's really nothing wrong with having your own life as Shira does, as long as you do keep in contact with those you love semi-frequently, but still, this unresolved argument lingers in my mind, and I do think still affects their relationship to this day, where Shira doesn't really trust or have faith in her brothers, largely considering them to ignore her concerns or needs, and not really care about how she feels. Overall, Shira's development and personality is a really stark model for the middle child theory. Her obstinate, rebellious spirit really clues us into how she may have been treated not only by her parents, but by her siblings as well. In fact, I think we have even more context about her unique relationships with Avi and Yoshi than with her mother and father. Having been in the middle, she often felt forgotten, with Avi being doted on by Naomi and Yoshi seemingly being favored by Elliot, and her feelings often, as a result, taking a back seat. Even so far, we've gotten a lot of context on her upbringing and role within the family, enough to get us to clearly understand her position and the formation of her temperament, which is especially important given how others, like Baby Feldstein, for example, describe her as someone who flies off the handle over nothing, or as someone who is extremely high maintenance. Such great writing for this character, and I can't wait to find out more about Shira. Honestly, she is on my way to becoming my favorite, and from my eyes, the most complex character in this show. I've really enjoyed watching her and trying to figure out why she does what she does, and I appreciate the detailed introspection we get into her childhood that shows us why she acts this way. But if you enjoyed this video, consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/PosiTVty. That's PosiTVty. There you get all these videos early, you get the essays unedited, so you hear all of my extra commentary and wonderful, wonderful mistakes, and you can tell me exactly what you want to see on the channel, and I'll pretty much make it immediately. So it's a great way to get more content for yourself, but also support this channel and help me grow in the process, which I appreciate. And I also appreciate you just being here in the first place, watching, liking, subscribing. It means a lot to me, honestly, and thank you guys so much for just being on this planet. I appreciate your presence. I will see you for the next video. Let me know what you think it should be. I listen to YouTube comment suggestions all the time as well, and I'm eager to hear from you guys. But I'll see you for the next video, and goodbye.